If you work, it's political. Got friends? It's also political. Got a family? It's definitely political. Live in the US? It's getting really political. Everything is political. We're back for another Everything's Political episode. I have somebody here who I have been wanting to talk to for probably over a year now. We've been waiting to chat it up. Stan Evans. Many accomplishments on this man's plate. Let's see. Snowboarder, first black snowboard photographer. Own it, take it, own it, take it.
Yes.
You're, to me, like an incredible native outdoorsman. Like, you know more of the outdoors than I definitely do. An advocate. You're on the board of SIA, which, if people don't know, the Snowboard Industry of America Council, whatever. Like, I can't remember what the name is, right?
Snow Industries of America.
Close enough. Close enough.
It's a mouthful.
Still very impressive. I've seen some of your talks, and it's just you have an incredible life, Stan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm honestly I just am so happy to be here just because you are just an intense advocate for diversity and people, not just outdoors, but across like the industry of marketing and entertainment. And I just love you using your voice to just bring more people to the forefront and celebrate more people that look like me and people in the outdoors and the different communities. I really love the piece you just did with Patagonia. It's just like you're really pushing things and moving things forward, and I love seeing that positivity and making things happen and just seeing results.
I'm a pusher. For sure.
So.
All right. Well, you're a pusher as well, and that's why I fuck with you. All right. So I want to get into the nitty gritty here.
Okay, for sure.
Stan, tell us a little bit about how you got where you got. You started out obviously like snowboarding, but you're from Alaska. There's so many interesting points there.
Well, I'll start with the first thing, and I think this is the first thing that people mostly get wrong about me as they think about the snowboarding and outdoors, where really my first love was photography and the arts. I was actually really into art and drawing and stuff like that, but then I picked up a camera and I had a photography teacher in high school who really kind of pushed me and was like, people didn't really like tell people like myself that there were careers like that out there. And she was like, Stan, you can actually go and be a photographer. And so skiing and snowboard was something I was into. And so it was just like the natural first thing that I took photos of. But my first love across the board, hands down, is photography. Straight up the arts.
Born with the camera, basically.
No, actually I wasn't born. It's funny because realistically, one of the things that people don't know about me and my career path, right, is like, my parents wanted me to become a doctor or a lawyer. Something about that. It's like my parents were born in the 40s, came through the 50s and 60s like that.
Same.
But my mom was very she was so concerned. She didn't want me to go into the arts on it because she was so concerned that people wouldn't hire a black photographer. She did not want me to become a photographer. She was like, please go to, become a lawyer, go a doctor. I was looking at West Point. I was going to different schools, checking out Annapolis and things like that. And because my dad was in the military. And so they wanted me to go and seek higher education and what can you make a good living, because we've sacrificed and gone through so much through the civil rights movements and things like that. We just want you to have a good life. And so it was a really hard thing for us to have this kind of dichotomy, because I thought my mom was hating on my dream. And I didn't understand.
Mom, what the hell?
And as a kid, you don't think it, because it's just your mom's she doesn't have that education to kind of tell you through and take you through the past of what they've been through to explain it. So I didn't get it, right? Until I didn't get it until I bought my first house, right? And my mom, she came in, she helped me remodel my house and was on my page. And that's when she was just like, I'm just really proud of you. I didn't think that you could actually do this and do this job and thing like that. And she told me why. And I didn't know. I was probably 35. Literally, I was old, And that was the first time that I had that kind of come to understanding moment with my mom, and then started looking back into civil rights and history and understanding kind of where I came from and my family's background.
Wow. It literally was in your mid-30s where you kind of had that come to Jesus moment with her.
Well, yeah, with my mom, because we...
Well, it feels nice. No, and I understand because my mom's Filipino from the motherland, right? Born in 1942. I do feel blessed, though, because people ask me this question all the time. Was your mom, empowering of your artistic career? Because, the band was going to make a man.
Still time.
Still, of course. I'm telling you, I'm gonna be really a hot old lady in the cover band for sure.
I get it. I love it.
But she was very empowering, but she was also make sure you go to college and get a job.
For sure. And
whatever it is.
My dad was more of the positive influence. Do whatever you want. He was more of the we've gone through this whole road of like rocky road there to be able to set you up so you can go and chase your dreams. And like we want to put you on this place so you can kind of like a jump off point so you can keep going. You can keep climbing that mountain, right? And so my dad was a little bit more of a different, like he just had more of like a zen kind of like moment about how to go about doing it, and just let Stan figure out his things, right? But we'll just support him. And so it was kind of that where like I kind of have like the yin and yang with my parents.
Was he strict?
For sure. My dad's a colonel in the army. My mom was a school teacher.
Ooh, that sounds like you probably had to sneak out of the house a few times.
Oh, for sure.
Let's talk about sneaking out, okay? Sneaking out is the best experience.
Oh
it really shows you what you're made of as a youth, as a teenager, for
God.
sure. I have so many sneaking out stories, actually, my mom. She did not know a lot. So, all right, so you fell in love with photography. You then got into snowboarding, which to me, as someone from New Jersey, seems like in Alaska, you probably have a lot of snowboarding, no?
Yeah, it was funny because I did skiing first and I switched over to snowboarding in college. And what basically kind of like looking at, they had a program where you could have in-state tuition in Montana for being a Montana, Alaska resident. But it was funny because then I moved to Virginia and then moved back to Montana to go to school. So I did this back and forth. So like my last year, senior year, was kind of just a bust in Virginia. I was like, how quick can I get out of here? So I go west, you know, and like, because I figured out my dream, right? And so I actually went to school in Montana State, have a degree in photography, and you know, like that was just, again, yeah, there was tons of snow all around. Like that was the thing, and that's what I chased. And I love the outdoors, and that's kind of how I kind of came into that community of Bozeman and going to school. And there's a great film school, photography, cinematography, and then just venture outdoor about near out your front door, Montana. So it was a great place for me, and it was cheap tuition.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. I barely knew Montana existed until I moved to Denver.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, it's super close. But so you just started grinding, you started snowboarding, and like snowboarding and culture to me, as someone who, again, like kind of always looked at street culture and skateboarding, and it's kind of these things that kind of amalgamate and like blend into one. They feel, especially in the 90s, right? It started coming up, and I love, as a person of color, that there were other people of color like doing their thing in that space. What was it like?
There weren't that many. I'm just going to tell you, I think it was maybe 2, 3 of us think of that. But it was an interesting thing in the dichotomy because like looking at in streetwear and clothing and stuff like that, it was a funny thing to be looking at action sports skiers like Glenn Blake or Scott Schmidt and like those type of people who are wearing like kind of like, you know, like down coats or weird like pattern stuff of like North Face, things like that. But then also they would show up in Method Man videos, right?
Yeah.
So for me as a kid, like I'm checking out this stuff and thing, but I'm seeing these Method Man videos and I was like, I knew where I wanted to be, and I was like into that kind of culture. I had dreadlocks down to here. Like it was like super the funniest thing, right? And so I had a radio show in college where like obviously I was one of the only black people in Montana at Montana State. So like I had to hold it down for the hip hop soul kind of thing. So I had a radio show for 3 years. You know, and like I did Saturday night, so I was like on pressure, like on, you know, so that's where a lot of my music knowledge and kind of just like being into the culture kind of stuff comes from, because it's like I definitely like, you know, it's like I knew who I was and stuff like that, but you're also still discovering it. But it was also this weird time of trying to figure out where you want to be and what place you want to go. And so for me, it's just like I just really wanted to work on like being the best at photography. I wasn't like a great like super talented photographer from the best, you know, like easy on it. Like I had to grind to get better. And I had to like work at it. And like I took a lot of like, I didn't have the best grades. I'm not gonna lie. Like it was like
neither did I feel you.
But I just, it was one of those things where like right now, like of my graduating class, I'm the only one still working professionally in photography.
Yes. And I was gonna say that's really pre internet and YouTube, right? So
no, it was like
how do you learn?
slides.
How do you learn? Yeah.
I had great professors. I had a professor who's this guy is Austrian named Rudy Dietrich, who like taught me different things about the zone system, reciprocity failure, 4x5 cameras, shooting medium format, like metering, like that, lighting, things like that. And so I had some great professors, and like, I mean, he was an old, weird white guy and like that, and like, but he just took me on his wing, and like, and it was one of those things where I had different photographers or professors who like when I told them that I wanted to be a ski photographer, they didn't jive with it. They just didn't think it was like the thing, because it's like our medium photography, it's so serious. It's like it's Helmut Newton and like Man Ray, and like, you know, you've got to be like in that kind of thing. Like sports photography, So I didn't get the best grades because I just didn't like what I was doing, you know. Like,
but there's so many like there's so many different areas in sports photography too that are like contingent on the environment, right? So you have to be not only, I mean, you know, like someone like a Jimmy Chin, right? Like you have to be ballsy and be able to be in that environment, and then also have the technical skill and like physical prowess, honestly, to be like bring those things together. Like, how did you start finding that sweet spot?
I mean, a lot of it is just having like really good mentors and just a lot of practice, right? Like, I mean, it's just like there was a guy that I worked with who kind of through that whole like Montana crowd, there was like a lot of outdoor people, like, you know, that's where Conrad came from, and that's where I met Alex Lowe, and then kind of that put me in touch with Jason Schutz, who was actually on the North Face team at that. But he was a person who really taught me about like guiding, about like being in the backcountry and like snow safety, and like he just like he put me through the ringer. Like I literally like we'd go down to Cook City and like I got frostbite a few times and things like that. And like I've been cliffed out on these weird cliffs where I had to like hike things out, and you just like you learn your way. It's kind of like those weird things, like, you know, when like in Batman Begins when he like goes and trains with those guys on the side of the mountain and like they just put him through the ringer. Like that's what kind of like what college was for me. But like but you got better and like then that, and then as you get better at that, that's where you kind of like take people in the next generation, kind of try and like teach them to be like safe and what it means to be in the mountains and that kind of out. And so, you know, I feel like I'm very fortunate that I had a great community of like that. And just there were like a lot of college kids who kind of like all moved there to kind of do the same thing. We just kind of fed off each other, and we kind of had this growing moment. We just took some trips back to Alaska and like different far off places. So like that was some of like the best times of my life, you know? Like it's just like you're young and you're just like you feel indestructible and like you're just like doing all these things. And it was
all the hope is still in you for sure. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I had tons of hope, you know? Like I loved what I was doing, and I had to have hope, you know? There's no one who looked like me had done anything like that before me.
Well, of course, and which brings me to my next thing. Like, all right, so you're kind of unique, obviously, within that industry, just a little unique. And you're starting to kind of figure out, like, how are you going to monetize this? How are you going to expand as an artist, right? Because you are making art day in and day out. I'm sure you dealt with some adversity in your time of trying to start your career there. Well, I mean, this whole podcast is about the political nature of life. And, you know, I would love to hear about an instance or kind of like a situation where you're like, man, this is a really like intense political problem and I need to kind of like break through it. Yeah, I feel like everybody kind of goes through that moment in their life. And I mean, was there one for you?
Here's the funny thing about that. And I like kind of like want to address it in two things, because I've kind of like lived two different lives, right? There was like the whole outdoor thing, and this is like, again, it was pre-internet, right? And like my name was Stan Evans. So I sent photos out and I talked to him on the phone, and like, let's be honest, I kind of talked like Brian Gumbel. Like people,
Stop.
they didn't know. Like a lot of things, like straight up, I would go and like send photos in there, and like you go to trade shows and people didn't know I was black. Like so it'd be a surprise, it'd be like a shocker, like, oh, you're Stan Evans, kind of like that. And so it was one of those things where I just worked really, really hard at like being good at my photography, right? And like my photography was always the thing leading, because you didn't have Instagram, right? And so by the time I worked on it, my photos were good enough that people were just hiring me. And then all of a sudden they were taking the blackness that came with it, right? Because I just did my job well, right? And so the second coming of that probably, but also people took it for granted. And it was a place where when you think about that, and kind of the reason I left after a while, right, is it's like I got tired of being the only. It's like the only black person here, the only black person there, only thing like that in your room, and those are the parts where you're like your voice got disregarded, where people didn't take me seriously, because like, how can a black guy know anything about the mountains? How can he know about like going and the mountaineering on this? How can you know about snowmobiling and that? And like people they would just look at them like, hey, you couldn't know, but like I've spent more of my life in the mountains than most people have in their whole lives, right? And so I left because that was kind of a thing of being disregarded and people not really understanding that. And like probably what kind of brought me back and kind of having basically what's WTF moment was like George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when people like, here's the whole thing, like I'd gone away, like started a whole new life. I'd lived in New York, I was living in LA. I was minding my business, to be completely frank. And I think that reckoning made people in the outdoors be like, man, we just haven't really like addressed or acknowledged culture in that space, right? And so when George Floyd happened, all these things reckoning in America of like civil rights this time around, right? They were like, man, we neglected this thing that we'd had right here. And so I started getting all these phone calls, right?
Got a little spotlight, and that's how we met, actually.
Yeah, and it's a thing where it makes you feel kind of like, at a certain point, like, I mean, like, part of my life was a little bit kind of like gone and done. So it was weird to have people come back and like be like, oh, you want to shine that light, but I'm like, but my focus is so far into like the next thing, right? And so within that, like it took some time. Like it took some time to me to kind of like reckon, because like it got to a point of like people disregarding my opinion so much that like it got to a point where I didn't really like outdoors. I didn't like snowboarding like that. Like
I don't blame you.
Part of like it was like a little bit of angst, right, about it, right? And so when all of a sudden people are like, hey, can you come back then? After you kind of like closed the door and moved on to your life to something else, I'm like, because I really love photography and the creative, it made me think about is like, what am I doing for future generations? And that's what made me come back, because here's the whole thing. It's like, it's not so much about me or what I could accomplish and everything, because I already accomplished everything that I really wanted to do, right? But how can I be a beacon to young Black kids who are in that space? Because there was no people that looked like me when I did it. And like, it was really hard trying to figure it out and go through that space. So all of a sudden I'm here and I am that Black person. And it's something that kids can look to and be like, that guy did it. Here's my path. And like that,
yes.
So I can understand. So that's what made me come back to being like, okay, here's how I can go and do it outdoors, because I wanted to be that North Star for someone who's younger coming out, and be like, you can do it. You can do whatever you want to do. You can do that. I did it. I've made this path. I've done all the rocky roads and hill speed bumps, so your path can be smoother going into this space. And so now looking at it and seeing this, like, it's almost like across the board, there's a renaissance of culture, right? But there's also an assault on culture, which is something we've seen with the whole Roe versus Wade being overturned yesterday.
Yes.
And so we're living in the simultaneous world of like celebration of culture, but assault on culture.
Well, the pendulum swings, right? And that we'll definitely get hardcore into that.
Okay.
But it was interesting. So you basically have this other life, right? When we talk about the second life, where you started to do more photography in like it's a celebrity space and kind of like, a really different artistic place. Like, how did you get into that? And like, what started to like really pique your interest into working in that space? And like, what are some successes that you've had?
I think there's a very key term that people use, and I wanted to go to a space where I was celebrated, not tolerated.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
In snowboarding and winter sports, and it got to a point where people were tolerated. Like, and like what I was doing there was I was manifesting a thing to make a lot of like basically rich snowboard kids richer, and it wasn't necessarily fulfilling for me, right? Because I've been doing it so much, and like, don't get me wrong, I love that space and love the outdoors, but it was just like this 9 to 5 of like, get the shot for me, Stan. Get this thing of that. Like, no one was asking me what I wanted to do, right? And I think that was the other second thing of the second coming with the whole George Floyd when the outdoors. Now, when they came calling, it wasn't about, hey, Stan, what can we do for you? Because we didn't actually like understand what you're doing at that time. It was more like, how can you help us look good now because we've alienated this whole posse thing like that. And again, I think sometimes those things go hand in hand, But I think when people are looking at multicultural marketing and look at that, I think what you need to do sometimes is ask, how can you make the people in those communities and the people in that culture happy? Not what's fulfilling for you and making you feel good on the path of that, because that's kind of like this weird kind of like charity type.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
content
like,
for them actually, and not for you.
Yeah, it's about making those people who are like it's the penance, right? And like the whole thing about it is it's like multicultural marketing and cultural like curiosity shouldn't be about penance. It should be about uplifting people to all this level so we can share this world, right?
And supporting the community in a genuine and authentic way. Yeah.
Not being like, okay, we'll give you this enough, but we're staying in power. It's about like distributing the power.
Oh, I know this all too well, for sure.
Yeah. And so I think that's a huge thing with me, and I know I'm jumping off here on a little bit of thing, but one of the things you were talking about, like what shows good multicultural marketing, that honestly, budgets.
Yes.
And leadership.
100%.
It's like,
where are they in power and where is the money?
How much are you spending on this cultural thing? How much money? Not like prints or billboards or things like that as far as that goes. Is it going back to the community, right? Do you have the leadership to make it authentic? And they're tracking it all the way through. It's not just the people on the billboards, right?
Who's shooting it?
Yes. Well, who's
writing it?
Yes. Yeah. And who are the stories? What's the story you're telling? Is it the story of, are you putting Black people in just white spaces that you want to do? Or are you actually talking about how Black people see this world and are navigating this world and about going at? Because that's when you build a customer base of like, you're speaking to them.
Totally. And it's hard because I think like people have good intentions, but you have to, and that's the point of like making sure that the narrative and what you're making is very much like from the lens of the community to the community and for those people. And this is applicable outside of racial too, right? Yeah. There's all kinds of different marginalized groups that have, I just wrote an article for Adweek about the queer community and how the queer community keeps expanding, right? Like it's not just gay and lesbian anymore. There's like many different like pieces of the queer community and like it's on you, especially if you're working in a company or you're a marketer, it's on you to keep continually educating yourself.
For sure. I get that. And it's a learning experience. I think part of that is we're looking at America, and I mean, like, and I'll just be completely honest, right? America at this point, I feel, is in a decline of values and integrity.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so part of that thing is like, when you are an American, looking in the mirror and looking at how you can live and live with yourself, and then what you're actually displaying across the community and how you want to be treated and how you want to treat other people, right? And if you're just sitting there and looking in the mirror and like, I'm doing okay, but I'm not so worried about what's going on around me and things like that, it takes practice and effort, and myself included. I go through selfish moments of like, oh, I want this and I need to do this and I need that, but I also have to look at like, okay, what am I putting the foundation for? Of like for other people to come and build on there, and I have to think and step up a little bit more, and that's constantly a thing of education, and that's what you're talking about of like these different expansions into the LGBTQ plus community and queer and non-binary stuff. Like I'm getting ready to do a shoot on diversity library, right? And it is one of those things where like I am literally studying, I'm learning, I'm trying to go about it because it was something where we were talking about, and it's just like, what does representation mean to them, right? And so it's like, and so like I ask because I'm like, it means a different thing to each person. And as a photographer, part of my job and part of what I love about my job is shining a lens on different types of people and different types of culture. That's like what fulfills me. It's not necessarily about just the paychecks all the time.
And a different light too, because I've seen some of your work and it's cool. Like you capture an essence, right?
I mean,
like,
I try. Like, it's like
everything's
a build, but it's like, but I think it's like that whole thing of like having that quest of kind of, it's like, I'm not here just to shoot a picture and fulfill my like, my selfishness, right? It's about making other people feel good about the photo that I took of them and showing their life.
Yeah.
Right? And so like part of the thing and part of the essence of what I'm doing is trying to showcase what this person is about and what their culture is about. And it's like necessarily that I know every single thing, but at least I'm trying. And like I'm trying every day. And sometimes I get it wrong. And sometimes I get it right. And sometimes I go way beyond and making it awesome, right? But the whole thing about it is understanding kind of like where those footsteps are and keeping on building, keeping on trying and keeping on them. Like, and it's like, again, we are in this cultural renaissance where like I literally am trying to study, and there's all these different mediums, like there's TikTok and there's like Twitch and there's YouTube. And so like now looking at how to try and go about distributing and talking about different cultures and pushing that like ethos out to all these different places and having this digital footprint. So like, all these people are out there and you're seeing them and they're like, and they're shining, you know? And it's like, it's amazing. And like, I feel like, man,
globally too.
Yeah, it's amazing to be a part. It's amazing to be like, I did part of that.
Yeah.
Right?
You contributed through your actions and through your bravery and just you making bravery. I hate that. I don't know.
I mean, it is bravery.
It is bravery. It is bravery. Yeah. You're brave. But I don't want to say it to be like corny and cliche, but it is true. You have to, there is an amount of bravery that I have, right, in my daily life that I discount because I'm just ballsy and I'm a New Yorker, right? But when you start really thinking about that, it is truly bravery because standing up for what you know is right and standing up for the future is really important for you just as an individual, you know? And so people don't give a shit. That's the funniest thing. Like, there are people who really don't care. I mean, I will never understand those people, but I try to give them grace too because I feel like a lot of people live in fear as well.
Well, for sure. And I think people will make the choice for God, what's the word I'm looking for? For satisfaction in this life, but then they've got to pay for it eternally later on.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people will like, it's the easy choice to deal with satisfaction right now. It's like there. It's not thinking about like, what am I building later on down this road? And it's kind of like, you know, when you like look at like kind of like the whole like Uncle Tom syndrome, right? It's like you would think about that of like, you know, you can live in the big house and think of that and like you don't, but you're still like having to serve a master and think of that. And maybe like being out and doing your own thing and striking your ground, maybe it's a little bit more uncomfortable and maybe it's a little harder to do. But if you can look at yourself in the mirror and kind of like be like, okay, I'm okay with this because there's the moments in happiness that I'm happy in there that I'm creating rather than serving someone else. And that's the choice you have to make.
Yeah. So one thing that you brought up before actually was like, all these different mediums and ways that people access information. I feel like, especially, and this is interesting with snowboarding because I'm obviously paying a lot of attention, my prior job. And I feel that the world of snow sports has actually become way more diverse in recent years, or just way more accessible to communities. Like, I grew up in the hood in New Jersey, right? Everybody I grew up with was Black and Hispanic. I did not. I didn't even have Asian friends. That was the ironic part. Now that I'm like the queen of Asians.
Dope Asians.
The dopest Asians. But when I was growing up, people were like, "Oh hell no, we aren't going to do that shit. That's crazy white people shit. Like, there is no way that we're gonna go snowboarding."
That was my family. Half of my family when they going to school in Montana. They're just like, "Why are you up there trying to do the white people shit?" And I was just like, "It's my thing. Like,
Yeah.
It's not."
I'm intrigued by these people.
No, but I mean, it was like the nature thing was like that's the whole thing where like that. The outdoors is just as much mine as it is anyone else.
And it should be, as it should be. And it's been really encouraging and interesting to see that bridge with culture. I mean, you were friends with Virgil. I think it's incredible that Virgil was a voice for that community too, and probably a different, through a different lens that nobody really thought of before, and I do see like mediums like TikTok opening people's perception, especially the younger generation, Gen Z, etc., of what is possible and what they can be, which is cool. You can find that one weirdo in the world who's just like you, right? Do you think that the kids have, because of the ground that you've laid, and not just you, but like other people?
Well, tons of people. I mean, there's lots of Black community people who've laid tons of work.
And me too, on the music label side. But, laying the groundwork, like, do you feel like the younger generation, especially Gen Z, like, still feel the kind of like one of only vibe that maybe you felt at the time?
I think no, and I'll give you two reasons why, right? Like, with instant messenger and TikTok and all these different ways like that, like, you can communicate. Like, you can find, like literally I could get on my phone right now, look up hashtag Black Snowboarder, and boom, whole thing comes up, right? So, like, back then, like, it was still phone calls, it was fax machines like that. Like, it's like, you didn't see, like, I didn't even know how to get a hold of Black snowboarders. Like, it was funny, so I was talking to...
You find Damon in the mix?
No, it was funny, because I was talking to Amon when we did a all-Black snowboard trip in '99, right? And he was, like, thinking, and he brought up, like, he was like, man, I was so excited when I got that phone call from you about asking me to go on this trip, right? And I, like, totally just forgot, like, I was like, I called each and every one of those people who went on this trip and told them about what I'm doing. I'm like, hey, and so you're having to explain on the phone. I was like, hey, I got this idea.
In the 90s? In the 90s?
In the 90s, right? Like, I want you to come to Montana to come snowboarding with me. We're going to get a bunch of Black people. We're going to Suburban. We're going to go to Yellowstone Club. We're going to go to Jackson Hole. We're going to do this. It's going to be amazing. They're just kind of like, what? And I was just like, but for me, something that had never been done. And here's the funny thing, and I want you to kind of like understand a little bit about the backstory on that, right? And just like the tokenism of Black culture and how it's become more transparent now. When we did that whole story, right, it was supposed to be an editorial where like we talked about the trip and talked about our whole thing and like had a whole conglomerate of the moments, right? They cut the whole story and they just made it a pictorial.
Oof.
So it's like funny when people like look at that and it's like a big celebration, but they don't really understand like the frustration I had, because it's like we got all these people together and we had a writer, we had the whole story done, and they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna go with the photos on this.
Just erasure of the full story and the narrative.
And so, like, no one ever got to tell their whole story. Kier didn't get to tell his story. Ben Hinckley passed. He didn't get to tell his story. Damon didn't get to tell his story. I didn't get to tell my story of, like, getting all these guys together. Amon didn't get to tell his story. And there were some great moments in there of, like, all of us, because it was the first time. That was the first time you'd ever gotten all these Black snowboarders together, right? And so, when you look at that, it's like when you look at Instagram edits and things like that, and, like, people are like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing, and I'm going to lay this hip-hop beat over it. Like, I'm going to use rap to, like, advertise my thing, right? That is what snowboarding does. Like, they wanted to take the Black essence thing of that, but they didn't want to take any of the transgressions that come with actually being Black.
Yeah.
And so it was just a funny thing of just, like, it was a narrative to be down. It was like the whole, like I want to stand next to the cool Black rapper, but I don't want to go live in the rapper's hood.
Oh no, you don't want to break bread, right? Like, you don't actually want to be in the shit.
Yeah, I just want to go to the show and like hang out backstage. But no, I don't want to go like your neighbor. Nah, that's cool. We're good.
And it's something that I've seen. Like, I've worked in rock music. You always clown on me, my misfits love.
Yeah, I love
I know. But
rock.
I worked in hip hop too, because like growing up, we listened to rock and hip hop. Like, same hard ass motherfuckers listen to the same shit, right? And it was really interesting to see like people in those different, even the dichotomy of thought in those worlds, right? Music, but not all music is created equal too. And just being, kind of a hood rat chick who liked rock music was weird, right? Like all my friends, again, are you into that white people shit? Like kind of asking those questions, and I'm like, I don't know. It's just in my soul, right? I love it, but I also love R&B and I love hip hop, and like, as a singer and as a performer, I love all those different influences. And I think, again, the kids today, like Billie Eilish, like, right? Yeah. They don't care, right? The kids are just like completely unjaded, and they're okay to freeform styles.
Well, it's interesting seeing like some of the stuff that Tyler Creator is talking about and like different musics like that. And there's some great rock bands out there. Like it was funny because the other day I was listening to the Mars Volta, and it's like funny because they're one of the best rock bands out there. And then like you go like let's go to the drummer like Rush. Like there's some great talented music people out there. And so like that was the thing. And like for me, like I'm just a curious fellow. So I'm trying to get as much rounded about as that as you can, right? And so that's the interesting thing to me, like where I didn't really like, I was just a weird artsy kid who was like into all the stuff, and I could just float from here and there and go into whatever group, whenever, however, thing like that, and fit in. And like that, bringing it back to Virgil, I think that's something where he's kind of like, he's been that bridge in a lot of ways, because he's like going to Louis Vuitton, but then he's like DJing, but then he's like trying to do stuff with his postmoderns to try and get more Black kids into fashion. And he's talking Stevie Williams on skateboarding, and he's like talking to me or Kier about snowboarding, right? And I think like the most interesting thing about Virgil that I think is really amazing to me is like, for me, I had to really fight really hard to get through the glass ceiling, like really just like, and it brought some resentment and it brought some pain, and I think of that. But he's like, I think the whole thing is like, honestly, he's just way more talented, right? Like he's just like that talented person who like, he just oozes efficiency and like doing all these different things.
And he's like very multifaceted too, yeah.
And I think he had a way of just bringing people to the party. Like he's just like people who was like inviting people to the party, like Louis Vuitton, come to this party, like Off-White, do this party, like
encouraging. He's very encouraging.
Yeah, and so like I met him through Instagram. Like people are like, how'd you get a hold of Virgil? Like he posted some stuff about the Black snowboarder story, and I was just like, hey, thank you for posting, just to bring awareness to the level of audience. And he's like, oh, tell me about it. I'm like, oh, my name's Stan, and blah, blah, blah. And I told him my life, and he like got into it. We had these conversations, and it was like funny talking to him because he's just off doing all these different things all the time, right? And the one question I had for Virgil, and I never got the answer with before he passed, right? And like I can show you the message, but it was just like funny. It was like, I was like, how do you find time to create a healthy relationship with your wife and kids doing all the things that you do? Because that was the thing that was really special to me. It's like,
it's a real question.
I didn't want your shoes. I didn't want your fashion thing. You don't need to send me any boxes or anything. I was just like, how do you go and manage your personal relationships with your passions? That's what I wanted to really kind of like figure out from him, because it's like, it's like he's doing all these things. I was like, when do you sleep, bro? Like, when do you like talking to your kids? Like, what's going on there? And we just, we never had a chance to really like sit down and talk about it. But that was the thing that, because what we're doing, and even like with right now, like, it's like personal relationships matter, right? Like the reason I'm on this show and doing that, because I love the platform that you're doing. I love what you're doing. I love that you're bringing the voice to the community and things like that. And it's like, it's reciprocal, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like we're collaborating. And so like, I love the fact that I'm here and I'm like helping push that out, right?
And you're sitting in my house, right? We're breaking bread in my house.
We got pizza over there, right there. Look at that. And so I think when you look at that, and it's like, but that takes effort.
Dude,
it takes a massive amount of effort. Like you're busy, I'm busy, a thing like that. And you gotta prioritize the things in your life that are important to you.
And honestly, it does require effort, and it really requires a sacrifice, right? Like people always ask me the same question. I'm sure they ask you, like, how do you have time to run a nonprofit, to like be like very visual in the nonprofit and like really connect with people, like mentor kids, be mentored by somebody, be married, trying to have a kid, like
clones. It's all
clones, exactly. And yes, I don't sleep as much as I should, and I would try to work out my 4 days a week too, try to get my lift on. But I think like it is really prioritizing what you want in life, right? And I don't sit around and like fuck off all the time and get wasted anymore, right? Because I don't have time. I don't have time. But believe me,
Well, you do
I
have
had
time.
I had
You
a
just
good
realize
time.
what your priority, what you want to do. You have time.
Exactly.
It's like you make time for what you want to do.
Oh yeah, I mean
That's what it is. Really
you know,
is, isn't it?
at like 21, 22, maybe.
No, the hangovers hurt these
30
days.
actually.
Let's be honest.
2 drinks, I'm gone.
Yeah.
But you know, even in my late 30s, like, I loved going out and partying. You know, I worked in the music industry. Forget it.
Kiana.
Kiana's our young friend. I do love living vicariously through her.
Oh
She's
my
so
God.
cute. She's like, these boys. I'm like, oh my God, she's adorable. But yeah, I mean, you know, like it is a different life, and I think prioritizing, and that's a great question. It's a shame that we're gonna the answer there, but I think really it's just a matter of like, if you're passionate as a person, and that scares the shit out of people. That's what I've come to realize.
Intensity.
Scares the
Intensity
shit out of people.
And curiosity. And
Yes.
like, that's like the thing, because like people are always like, you know, it's like, that's the part where like thing where it's like, as you've gotten, and probably as a ethnic person, it's like difficult to deal with.
Yes.
Like, oh,
You
you're
mean
difficult to
opinionated?
deal with. You're difficult. Like, oh, you're not going to screw me over on this deal. Oh, I'm looking at everything on this contract. Oh, I'm making sure that equity is in this for me and for my community. Oh, I'm making sure that how my artwork is being displayed is a representation of how I want it to see. Oh, you mean that? Oh, yeah, no. Maybe
I'm
a
taking
little
care of
difficult.
me.
Yeah,
I'm
I
taking
am.
care of me.
Because I have a vision. I have a vision of what I want to do, and there is nothing, I will not yield. I will not fold. There's a vision that I want to put out into the world, and I'm going to achieve it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think you should ever back down from that, right? Like, because honestly, you know, even when I feel I'm being too much, I'm like, well, fuck it, this is who I am.
You're hella extra. Like,
I am
it is.
so extra, you know it. All right, speaking of extra, like, we got to get into this.
Okay.
Before we
next?
go, we have to get into this.
Okay.
Biggest thing. Last few days have been a little bit crazy, and by the time you're probably listening to this podcast, it's probably been like weeks or so.
It depends on how quick you can edit.
Yeah. Listen, we're trying our best here. We're trying our best. I'm just doing it all in one day. I'm sweating. You'll see a costume change. Roe being overturned. And beyond that, too, we have like, you know, gun reform, and pretty much the last like, I want to say 10 years have just been like riddled with gun violence, you know, children obviously being the victims of a lot of that, innocent people, marginalized communities, all kinds of communities, honestly, at this point with gun violence. And I mean, let's dig into the gun thing first, because I know that we had kind of had a little preliminary conversation.
Well, I think honestly, I want to, because it's top of my mind, because you like started with the Roe v. Wade, and I want to just break down something of that.
From a man's opinion too, I'm very interested.
From a man's opinion, right? So, my sister had an abortion. My sister, senior year of high school, she was on a full ride academic scholarship to Oklahoma University. I love my sister. She was one of my favorite heroes. She was something who really empowered me and put me on this path, and was like a very strong woman in my life, right? And so with her going to it, you know, it's like she had a very defined, clear path of what she wanted to do as far as like journalism and going to school. And she made a choice that she was not ready to have a child. And, you know, like her boyfriend at the time, although they've been together for a while, you know, this might not be the person for her of getting married and that. And it's just like, I look at the career path of like, just the path of her life, right? Where it would have been completely altered, maybe different. You know, maybe she could have had the child, maybe she it was her choice, right? But then again, she went through school, she graduated 3 years, she became a DJ, and she's the one who got me on the radio show, right? She became a TV anchor for Oklahoma City.
Wow.
Right? So she was the first person to cover the Oklahoma City bombing. And so because of that, she got a promotion and became weekend anchor, right? And so from that, and her encouraging me, she was the one in my life who was always like, Stan, you can be a photographer, Stan, you can be a photographer, Stan, you can be a photographer. My sister was killed by a drunk driver. And when she passed,
Sorry.
she had a small settlement that helped me out, and I like that, and I had like $5,000, something like that. Like literally, it was one of those things, but it was a moment in my life because of having like my sister taken away from me. It was like, just get busy living, or like you're slowly dying.
Yeah.
Right? You're slowly dying on your dreams. And so I came back from my sister's funeral, and I quit all my jobs, and I put all my effort into photography. And like that is what the reason I'm here is because of my sister. And so seeing that, if she'd taken a different path, who knows? Maybe she would have kids, maybe she would have done a different thing. Maybe she'd still be alive today like that. But she's still an inspiration in the way that she was to me. And like my family supported her decision and the way that she wanted to go about living her life. And for me, seeing that and seeing my family support it and just us being supportive of what she wanted to do and her chasing her dreams and realizing like maybe I'm not quite ready to be a mother and kind of do this thing like that. I just feel like I was seeing that and living that close to it. I was like, women should have this choice to do this. It's not something that I should be trying to inflict or have all these different people put into it, inflict on theirs. And then like there's so many different kind of like coming to terms, like biological reasons of why women should be able to have abortion. And like, and it's an interesting thing, right? And I think it's the thing that scares me the most about this is people are not watching the political landscape, right?
Exactly.
And so when you look at that, and I'll tell you a very interesting story of like, because we were talking about how like political WTF moments, right? When I first moved here, it was right when it was the Trump-Clinton election, right? And it was the day that Trump had gotten elected. I was going for a walk. I was over in Elysian Park. And it was really interesting because I came across this Latino family. And they kind of like, you know, you're kind of just in a shell shock kind of moment, thing like that, right? And, you know, the guy kind of wanders up to me. I was kind of by myself. I was just like, I didn't really want to like talk to people. And he's like, hey, man. I'm like, hey, you know, I'm thinking that. And he's like, who'd you vote for? And I'm like, well, think about Hillary. And I was like, who'd you vote for? And he's like, Trump. And I was just like, why, right? And then I go and I was like, I'm explaining. He's like, well, Hillary is pro-choice, and like I saw these ads and like think of that, and they were talking about like her, and she like doesn't believe in God and kind of thing. And there's just like the whole thing when Facebook was like altering people's ad, they're visually altering the things with that because he was like, there was this whole thing, and she didn't say God and thing of that. And I was like, and I had to explain to him, I was like, well, there's video editing. I'm like, you know, like I was like, they could change that, and it's like it's a weird, interesting thing of like a regulation, but. For people who don't know, who don't work in our field, who don't understand, like media can be manipulated. And I think this is a big thing of like why you need to have ethnic and cultural media, that because like having
giving different sides of the story. You know,
showing the story, right? And so then talking to him some more, and he's like, well, Hillary is pro-choice. And I was like, okay, so like, you know that like, I understand you're Catholic and you're your family, but pro-choice means you have a choice. So you don't have to have an abortion if your family. And he was just like looking at me, he was like shocked, like no one had ever told him that. And he was like, pro-choice means you have a choice. And I was like, yeah, man.
That's
like you have a choice.
Literally in the words. I mean, that's an interesting take, actually.
But he did not know. Like he literally did not understand the way that they've been selling it and marketing it, media and Facebook and on Trump's page. Thing of that was like, it was pro-choice means
just
like
pro-killing, pro-killing, yeah.
And so when you look at that and you look at things like that, you look at like, okay, let's just look at this. This is a roadmap, right? You look at Philando Castile getting shot with his concealed carry, thing of that. You look at Kyle Rittenhouse getting off on killing 2 people in Wisconsin, right? You look at January 6th, like it's like they're probing, like the conservatives are probing the battleground to see how far they can go and get, right?
And they probe so differently.
So differently, right?
So because they're very succinct too,
right? And so when you look at that. And how they're probing, like they're seeing how much they can get away with, right? Yeah. And when we don't actually have consequences like that, when you look at oppressors, right? Oppressors back down when all of a sudden they realize that they have consequences. If you look at Hitler in World War II, whether that they just, Chamberlain just let him kind of like go and do whatever. Like, you know, you look at Ukraine, like even right now, like people are kind of like, there haven't been consequences with Putin, right?
Yeah.
And so people don't react sometimes, like if when you look at people who are oppressors, they don't react to a common reason or like, hey, let's talk this out like that. They're just like seeing how far can I go, right? And so when you look at that and like you look at the whole thing of like the leaked memo for the Roe versus Wade overturn, like right, and everyone's like super mad about it. And I'm like, well, if you work for us and you're doing the people's will and like that, why should this memo getting out be like, why, like, are you doing the people's will? It should be something to discuss where it comes along against the public and the community.
Not happening in a cloak in the back room.
Like,
you know?
if you're trying to hide something, you're up to something.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And so the thing of that's the first red flag, right? Like they're up to doing. But the whole thing about it is like, we're all just asleep at the wheel, kind of watching while we've been probing. They've been probing the whole time. And look at that. And so when you see that, this is not some crazy like, oh my God, this is how this happened, right? You've been watching all these things happen where like Trump can get away with this. January 6th can get away with this. Like it's like treason. Like if you want to go see and do something really about the whole Roe versus Wade thing like that, right? You want to start showing consequences to the Supreme Court, right? You go and you actually put the people to trial on January 6th for treason, right?
Totally.
Then you go and bring Clarence Thomas's wife Virginia, who helped organize the January 6th treason thing, you bring her in and you have consequences, right? And then all of a sudden, Supreme Court justices and people start seeing there are consequences for your actions, right? But as long as you keep on letting those people get off and do their thing, like it's like the fact that she's like, you mean to tell me that Clarence Thomas is married to this woman who helped organize the and like he's like, I don't know what's going on. It's like, what's going on in your household, man?
Oh yeah, no, for
You know?
sure. And the consequences thing is, it's such a good point.
It's accountability.
It is accountability, and we've been actually in the last probably like 10 years in this really interesting flux. And honestly, like since the 90s, right, the pro-life movement has been like coalescing into this like financially like huge, gigantic kind
like
of movement.
again, I'm looking at this all stuff. I'm looking at these Instagram posts. I'm looking at all this stuff and donating for like Planned Parenthood, and I'm like, we're trying to have a bake sale on rights that are part of our Constitution.
That should be there, yeah. Well, I'm donating to Planned Parenthood.
Here's the whole thing. I have too.
I'm
And like another thing, I'm like literally like I've donated prints to sell for Planned Parenthood.
We need the heavy hitters.
I've looked at ACLU. I would actually talk to a photo and be like, hey, what can I do about here actually to go be able to do these steps, right? But we need more. And I think like it's the whole thing. The fact that like people are just so like, oh, I'll just let my rights get taken away. Like you need to be in the streets sooner. Like if you're having your rights, because the next thing is like separate but equal. Like they're already going after like it's like okay, then it's LGBT rights, then it's same-sex marriage, then it's like equality.
But it's also IV, like, so even on the flip side, I was actually watching a report this morning with some right-wing, like, super conservatives, like pro-life, and, they did bring up IVF. Now, I know because I'm going through IVF currently, and I think, honestly, when this moment hit, it really shocked me and made me super paranoid about the future, because in some religious circles, the thought of IVF is actually also abortion because there's some embryos that have mature. And now you're in a fucking petri dish. It's literally the survival of the fittest when you're in the dish. And what comes out of that is what you eventually have a baby from, right? But there's so many religious circles that believe that that's actually like akin to abortion, which is, to me, absolutely ridiculous. But okay, like giving it even a valid platform, right? Saying like, okay, this is a process where people who cannot procreate life easily actually can begin to create life. And it is actually a pro-life movement because you're trying to create that life. So it's so insane when you start to think about like a little bit of the medical implications, even what you're saying, like there's so many women who have, either stillborn or they have like babies that are basically doomed to die as soon as they leave the body and could kill the mother as they're coming out.
I don't even want to get into the whole rape, incest.
Oh, that's even like
just like
that's like low key, just out of control. Not even low key, super high key.
But
actually.
then just seeing that senator and being like, I can't remember, the senator from Texas just tweeted today about like,
Texas.
Equal rights next. Like you literally put it like equal, like okay, Roe vs. Wade today, like let's get on this next. Like and I'm just like, so he's already coming. They're already coming.
You're like, I'm moving out of America very quickly. I'm getting out of here.
I think that's the whole thing, though. And again, I don't think like that's the point. Like running's not the answer. It's about looking in the mirror as Americans and having integrity and thinking of that. And
absolutely.
Like being like, okay, we're not going to stand. It's like this is what this country was built on, was like freedom, of like choice, of like being able to do what you want to do, how you want to do it, and it's like all of a sudden we're just going to abandon it because like game didn't go our way.
And it got hard. And you actually had to be engaged in the process. Yeah. You should have been engaged in the fucking process the whole time.
From the get-go,
exactly.
Right? And so when I look at this thing and you like look at like the whole like Black Lives Matter rights and so forth and so far, and it's like you've been seeing the playbook. All the actions have been happening right now, and all of a sudden like that religious right just hit a home run kind of thing out there, and I think it's not about Instagram posts. It's about organizing and like putting people in government. It's about getting people registered to vote. Yes. It's about watching redlining and seeing how it's going, because like that's the only thing they talk about. Uvalde, that is like the. They live in Texas, and we're trying to do stuff, but they make it hard for us to vote. They
absolutely.
Make it hard to
redistricting.
Yeah.
Like the fact that in Ladera Heights here, like Karen Bass isn't even on the ballot because they've been redistricted out. The most like an affluent Black area, like it's insane how many like tricks on the back end.
Like us as a community and like culturally, we have to understand a little bit more about the system that is America.
Yeah.
Right. and then actively like it's like we're trying to like oh, this game isn't fair, and I'm like, well, this is like, I don't know, maybe it's not fair, but we need to start playing the game better.
We are not even, most people aren't even playing the game.
Exactly.
It's
right?
like it's a
and
selfish
that's the
kind
whole
of like
thing
point of view.
about like where like, you know, it's like I'm good enough today, but what am I leaving the foundation, leaving the steps for tomorrow, for my children, for the future, for what's going on and that. And I think like people need to think about it. And I think that's where like that's great about what we're doing here, and like being able to engage in community, invigorate community, organize community and stuff like that. And I think that comes, and you have to have a legitimate like look in the mirror of like who you are as a person, right? And like, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit here and just tolerate this and let this stuff happen? Or am I actually going to get in here and actually start doing things?
Yeah,
right?
am I going to get up and move?
Am I going to like organize, and like, what can I do? It's like, it creates sacrifice, because it's so easy. Like, oh, I can go do my Instagram post and go on vacation and like, oh, borders are open and like, I don't want to chill. Like, you know, it's like I can go hike with my dog Bridger and like, it's cool. But like, change is hard. Like,
It is
working
very
for change
hard.
is hard, and like that, and like, and it's just like, you know, like I've sacrificed a lot to do some of the things I've tried to do, and like it's like, and we need help. Like, you know, it's like we can't do it all alone, you know, like that. But so it's like figuring out how to invigorate people and have them see a bigger picture of like, you know, and I think that's something like with really like talking to my parents and like seeing them go through a whole civil rights movement of like not being able to vote, of being redlined, of being districted, of not being able to get loans, and like you see progress, and like I even see it with me, like how like, you know, it's like I've definitely gained a lot of respect, but also like sometimes I'm still a lot of times disrespected.
Of
right?
course.
And so there is progress, but like it's like, but all that, like all those things that my parents fought for me right there, they aren't for naught, right?
And they could go away. Honestly, what we've seen from this instance is that people are taking for granted those rights. And this is a moment where, you know, we talk about voting, and I understand that people are disenfranchised with the voting system, and probably now with the Supreme Court at this point, like what retains that belief if there's a whole faction of humans that aren't, you know, aligned with that thought. But also on the flip side, when you look at the right, they felt the same on the other way. So it is definitely something where voting and actually taking that action, and like you mentioned, like mobilizing, getting together, finding a way to actually coalesce your like intentions together, it cannot be taken lightly, and cannot be taken for granted at all.
Well, also, I mean, a lot of it is just like campaigning. Like, it's just an interesting thing. I mean, like, that's the whole thing, and I don't know as much about it, but campaign regulation of funding, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
Like
PAC, super PAC, yeah.
Again, you level the playing field, and it's actually about what you can do and what you're doing. But I mean, again, that was who's the mayor candidate? Rick Caruso.
Oh, Caruso's out there, yeah.
44 million, you know, versus Karen Bass, you know, like, and it's just like.
Well, it's a flesh wound to him as a billionaire, you know, like.
But it's an interesting thing of this, like how people are going about fighting. So you have to get more creative when you don't have the money or the funds to do it. And like she's holding her own. I hope that she can do more. But it's an interesting thing of like being that person. And when I talk about like being in the outdoors and only and thing like that, I've fought that fight before.
Yeah.
I know what that feels like, and I've seen it, and I know it's like it's not pretty and it's not fun. But it doesn't mean that I like all of a sudden like don't keep on fighting that fight, right? And it's like maybe get smarter, maybe I get wiser, maybe I enlist some younger kids to kind of help me out. But like, you know, but you have to like kind of figure out, because you have to turn them on. Like, that's the whole thing. Like, I think when you're talking about like, you know, like then, you know, the younger generation of that, it's interesting how much people don't read books anymore.
Oh yeah.
Like,
it's a headline. It's a headline driven culture right now.
It's funny because like looking at that in the influencer world and kind of like talking about that renaissance, and especially the interesting thing in the outdoor world, right, is just how much people thought getting a young black 20-something person like that was like their DAI program. Like, let's get this as a partner and like that, and like we got this covered. But like you have to understand, like these are kids who have not studied like Malcolm X. They have not read The Color Purple. They have not read, God, I mean, like
they're still new to the world. They're still new to the world.
And so that's the whole thing of like, that's the part of the powers that be taking advantage of these people because they think they're breaking into the glass ceiling, and like and basically like kind of like leveraging them in weird ways to make themselves look better again. And I think like the whole thing about it is like that's where it comes to the leadership, and like that's the part of the thing that's probably the most frustrating stuff of watching the whole outdoor world of that, of just like being like, okay, well we have some black people on our Instagram page and like we got that, but I'm like,
Box
where,
checked.
but where
Box
is
checked.
the whole thing of like looking at the leadership principles of what MLK were doing, what Malcolm X was doing, what Rosa Parks was doing, like those principles across the board, right?
That's going to take time from an industry that's extremely
And
white
again,
and male, by the way,
so,
white and male.
But I'm saying, but you have to take that initiative, right?
Sure.
And it comes on both ends.
But
right?
how does that happen when someone of color comes into leadership? You know what I mean? Like literally, it's this interesting cyclical problem. Like there are no people of color in leadership positions in a lot of those places. So to your point, even more, it's like it's going to keep becoming this like cycle of the same impact because of the lack of diversity at where it is.
No, for sure.
That sound it's such an encouraging sound to hear those things, but it's so true.
How do I answer that?
Well, it's not a question.
I mean, it kind of is a question.
It's a bit of a declaration from my personal experience.
But I think here's the whole thing. I think it's like all of a sudden people getting more interconnected, and all of a sudden understanding and actually like taking the time to look from perspective. And I think what it takes is like, here's the whole problem where I think kind of with industry as a whole is they're trying to bring people into their perspective of kind of like white cis male world, you know, where like no one wants to go dive in and be curious about, you know,
their
like,
experience,
all
yeah.
their experiences like LGBTQ plus, Latina, Black, like it's like I think like, and I think when you actually make that and kind of like something that I've kind of talked about, it's like having a potluck meal, right? And it's like one of those things where you invite all these different people and they all bring different things. And maybe you have a few different dishes and maybe you like something that you like more and that. But, you know, maybe you want some more of that. Maybe you wanted some more like pumpkin pie. Maybe you wanted more sweet potato pie. Maybe you wanted like cobbler. Maybe you wanted corn on the cob, right? Maybe you didn't get enough of those things, but everyone got fed, right? Everyone walked away kind of like fed from the meal and like learned something about different types of people.
People aren't sitting down for that meal, though.
And so that's how we do is like, the whole thing is like trying to figure out how we get people to sit down for that
Come
meal.
to the table, yeah.
Exactly.
For sure.
So like, I'm not the person with the answers, but I'm like conceptually in my mind, I'm like, I just know from looking at it, like it's even just when you walked in here, you're like, oh yeah, so nice, she has good shoes on. So I'm like, yeah, I kind of looked around when I walked in.
Thanks for some Asian, yeah.
Like I saw kind of pretty much what's going down here, and like, and I just was like, hey, I'm coming to visit you. Like it's not necessarily something that I always do, but I'm in your house and I'm in your culture, I'm in your ways, think of that. And then you like busted up some pizza, so I don't know if it's all like that.
Well, it's not Asian pizzas that were good.
But
I totally get that.
But it's just like being mindful of your surroundings and having respect for people's culture. You know, like it's like you don't have to agree with everything of that, but you also might learn something and take away. And it's what you kind of take away from that and coming at things with a curious mind.
Amazing. Well, that's the mic drop right there, because that was the number one gem there.
Okay, there we go.
Well, no, I want to thank you so much, Stan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was
an incredible
awesome.
interview and so many gems in it for sure. And we'll be looking out for you to make sure that you keep that creative mind rolling.
I'm trying. I'm out there fighting the fight for sure every day.
Well, thank you. I'll definitely drop some links so that people can check out your work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.